When a country's money starts losing value, people panic. Groceries that once cost a few dollars suddenly cost hundreds. Savings turn useless, and paychecks can't buy bread. It happened before in Germany, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela. Now many wonder if it's beginning in the United States. Every empire begins with faith in its own strength. Citizens believe their money is backed by something solid, whether gold, land, or power. That belief becomes habit, and habit turns into trust, until small cracks begin to show. Money is only valuable because people agree it is. The paper itself means nothing. It's the shared belief that gives it life. Once that belief weakens, every note, every coin becomes a reminder of something that no longer holds weight. Inflation rarely starts with chaos. It begins quietly, with a few cents added to food, rent, or gas. People shrug it off, thinking prices rise and fall. But behind the calm surface, trust begins to thin. Most citizens don't notice the first warning signs. They focus on daily needs, school fees, bills, and groceries. By the time they realize the difference, their savings already buy less, and their wages no longer stretch to cover what they once did. Leaders assure everyone that it's temporary. They promise it's part of economic growth, a normal adjustment. The public wants to believe them because belief feels safer than doubt. That is how the first stage begins, with comfort instead of caution. Central banks respond by printing more money, calling it support. They tell people it's to help workers, businesses, and families, but every new note weakens the ones already in circulation. It's like adding water to soup and expecting it to stay rich. When more money chases the same amount of goods, prices climb naturally. A loaf of bread that cost 1 coin now costs 2. People blame the shops, not realizing the real cause sits behind closed government doors. In history, the signs were always clear in hindsight. Economists warned, but few listened. Ordinary people believed growth could last forever. The system depends on faith, and nobody wants to be the first to admit it's fading. Every currency collapse follows a pattern, a kind of rhythm that repeats through time. It has 3 stages, each one feeding the next. Stage 1 feels safe, Stage 2 feels uncertain, and Stage 3 feels unbearable. Right now, some say the United States may already be standing at the edge of Stage 1. The same early signs are there: rising debt, endless printing, and the quiet confidence that nothing truly bad can happen here. Stage 1 always begins with comfort. The government prints money to ease pressure, fund wars, rebuild after disasters, or cover debts. People feel relief at first because the pain softens. That comfort hides the trap forming underneath. In Weimar Germany, after World War I, the nation owed impossible debts. The government saw printing more marks as the only escape. It worked briefly, letting life go on while the real problem grew in the shadows. To pay for the war and reparations, the presses ran day and night. Banks flooded the streets with new currency. The first rush of cash felt like recovery, but the value behind it was already dissolving. Citizens didn't see the danger. Shops were full, and money was easy to find. Prices rose a bit, but wages kept pace. People believed the government had found a new way to beat the old rules of economics. Businesses adjusted quickly, raising prices before costs caught up. It became normal to see price tags change weekly. What seemed like small adjustments were actually the first sparks of something much larger. Ordinary savers lost quietly. Their bank accounts held the same numbers, but those numbers meant less each month. Families that once felt secure began stretching every paycheck while pretending life hadn't changed. Politicians repeated the same promise: print more, fix everything. The public believed because disbelief meant facing fear. The illusion of control became stronger than the reality of decay. Confidence is fragile. Once leaders depend on printing to fix every problem, the foundation of trust begins to shake. People still go to work, still buy goods, still plan for tomorrow, unaware that the value beneath their world is thinning. The illusion lasts until the outside world stops believing. When foreign investors pull out or refuse to accept the currency, the mirror breaks. A nation can convince itself, but it cannot convince the world forever. That is how every collapse begins. Not with riots, but with a quiet refusal somewhere far away. A trade deal canceled. A lender demanding gold instead of paper. Faith leaves in whispers before it screams. Some analysts see early warnings in modern America. They point to trillion-dollar deficits and unchecked spending. The same language of reassurance echoes from leaders who promise it's all under control. The government prints and borrows to keep the economy moving. People get stimulus checks, markets rise, and the illusion of strength grows. On the surface, life feels better. Underneath, the dollar stretches thinner each day. The stock market cheers as real wages stall. People invest not out of hope, but fear that money sitting idle will lose worth. It's the same emotional reaction seen before every currency's decline. Stage 1 always feels harmless. It's the calm before trust breaks. By the time most realize what's happening, they're already trapped inside the second stage, where confidence starts to vanish faster than it can be restored. History shows that when people begin doubting their money, no speech or policy can reverse it. Once faith cracks, the fall speeds up on its own, and that's exactly where the next stage begins. Stage 2 begins, when people stop believing what they are told. Prices rise too fast to ignore, and promises from leaders sound empty. The public's confidence starts to break, and money begins to lose its meaning. In Weimar Germany, people rushed to spend their marks before prices jumped again. They bought bread, shoes, anything they could, because waiting even a single day meant paying double. Trust vanished faster than anyone could count. Shopkeepers marked prices several times a day. Employees were paid with sacks of notes that had to be spent the same afternoon. By evening, the same cash would no longer buy a meal. People started trading goods instead of using money. Neighbors exchanged flour for fuel, clothes for bread. Bartering replaced currency, and with that change, the economy turned into chaos, built on survival instead of planning. Photographs from that era showed families pushing wheelbarrows filled with money. A single loaf of bread cost billions of marks. Paper lost its purpose, and people realized too late that faith, not numbers, was the real currency. The same pattern appeared in Zimbabwe decades later. Farms were seized, productivity crashed, and to fill the gap, the government printed more money. Each note carried more zeros, but less value. The math no longer made sense. When food became scarce, shelves emptied, and the cost of a meal doubled almost daily. Families watched their savings disappear, not through theft, but through the steady erosion of worth that no one could stop. As factories closed, riots broke out across cities. People demanded stability, but the system was already broken. The currency, once a symbol of independence, had become a symbol of betrayal. The government searched for someone to blame. Leaders pointed at outsiders, sanctions, and conspiracies. It was easier than admitting that the printing press, not foreign hands, had destroyed the nation's wealth. Citizens began using American dollars in the streets. It wasn't legal, but it worked. A stable currency meant survival. The country's own money was still printed, but no one cared to touch it anymore. Confidence is like glass. Once it cracks, no patch can hide the damage. In every country that faced collapse, once the people lost faith in the value of their money, no policy could rebuild it. Venezuela followed the same path years later. Oil wealth had built the nation, but corruption and poor planning weakened it. When oil prices fell, the government filled the gap with printing, repeating the same fatal pattern. At first, the extra money felt like relief. Wages rose on paper, but store prices leapt higher. Every bill printed was another drop of water sinking the ship deeper. When oil revenue vanished, imports stopped. Groceries disappeared from markets. Hospitals lacked medicine, and lines formed outside every store. Inflation turned daily life into a race to find food before prices changed again. By then, the pattern was clear. Every government believed their situation was unique, but history showed it wasn't. The same choices, the same printing, the same results. No one escaped the cycle by pretending it didn't exist. Stage 3 arrives when people stop using their country's currency altogether. It's not rebellion, it's instinct. When paper fails, people move toward whatever works, whether it's gold, dollars, or goods traded hand to hand. In Weimar Germany, foreign currencies became prized. Farmers demanded payment in gold or goods. City workers were paid in food rather than marks. The government's money became worthless, and society had to invent its own way to trade. Factories began issuing their own tokens for wages. People accepted them because they held more real value than the official money. The entire concept of a national currency collapsed in plain sight. The middle class lost everything. Lifelong savings vanished within months. Houses were sold for handfuls of cash that couldn't even buy groceries. Generations of security turned to dust between fingers. Zimbabwe faced the same nightmare. The trillion-dollar note became a joke that no one wanted to hold. Children used bills as toys, and adults carried them in bags only to buy a loaf of bread. A family could walk into a bakery with millions and still go home hungry. Numbers stopped mattering. The paper wasn't money anymore. It was just decoration for a broken promise. As trust disappeared, crime increased. People who once worked respectable jobs turned to barter, smuggling, or theft. When a nation's money loses meaning, morality bends to survival. Bartering became normal again. People traded gasoline for rice, clothes for eggs, anything of real use. A bag of flour had more value than a pile of printed cash. Governments kept printing, insisting recovery was near. They replaced old notes with new ones, added more zeros, changed designs, but none of it restored belief. Printing cannot rebuild what faith has already abandoned. Each country collapsed under denial. Leaders refused to admit that the problem wasn't lack of money, it was too much of it. Once faith is gone, even endless paper can't make people believe again. In Venezuela, people began leaving the country with small bundles of US cash. They crossed borders just to find bread, medicine, or work. Their own money was useless beyond its paperweight and faded design. Hyperinflation reached millions of percent. Prices changed multiple times a day, and stores stopped listing numbers altogether. Workers were paid daily, but their wages lost value before they could even be spent. Doctors, teachers, and skilled workers abandoned their professions. Survival mattered more than pride. The collapse didn't just destroy the economy, it erased entire careers and dreams built across decades. The government tried to rebrand its currency with new names and lower digits. They promised this time it would work. But the people had learned the truth. Printing paper was easier than earning trust. Every nation that experienced collapse had to start over. It wasn't only about new money, but rebuilding belief. When a society stops trusting its currency, it also stops trusting everything else around it. The cycle repeats across history. Money printed, trust lost, and collapse follows. It's not magic or mystery, just a human pattern of greed and denial. Every empire believes it will be the one to escape it. No country sees the danger clearly while it's growing. The numbers look manageable at first. Politicians and economists speak confidently, but their optimism hides the simple truth that debt always grows faster than income. Debt is like gravity. Once it becomes too heavy, no amount of promises can lift it. Empires fall not because of enemies, but because they spent more than they earned for too long. As the system weakens, citizens grow dependent on government aid. Subsidies, relief checks, and benefits make life easier, but they also tie people closer to the very machine that's running out of fuel. When the aid stops, chaos begins. The crowd that once cheered for help turns angry when help dries up. Every historic collapse shows the same turning point, the moment dependency becomes disappointment. Charts from different eras tell the same story. Each shows a sharp upward curve of money creation before collapse. It looks like progress at first, until the line shoots upward too fast to sustain. Modern data shows the US money supply surging after 2020. Trillions were created within months. The world called it stimulus, but historians recognize it as the same first spark seen before every monetary failure. Record spending and borrowing became normal conversation. What was once shocking became routine. When society stops reacting to massive debt, that's when danger hides in plain sight. The dollar remains strong, but strength can be deceptive. It holds its position because the world still believes in it. Belief keeps it standing, just as belief once kept the mark, the bolivar, and the Zimbabwe dollar alive. Digital transactions and stock prices create an illusion of stability. Numbers rise on screens, giving comfort to millions, while the actual value behind those numbers quietly erodes beneath inflation and debt. Other nations have started trading without the dollar. Small moves at first. Oil deals, trade agreements, and currency swaps. But every small shift chips away at the foundation of America's financial dominance. Commodities like gold and silver quietly climb as faith in paper weakens. History always shows this migration of value, from trust in promises to trust in something tangible. Savings accounts no longer protect the average worker. Interest rates stay below inflation, turning saving into slow loss. People begin moving money into property, metals, or anything they can touch and hold. Across the country, investors speak of diversification, but at its core it's fear. Fear that the paper they rely on might one day fail them, just as it failed millions across history. Early signs of distrust are already visible. Online debates grow louder about the real value of the dollar. Ordinary people, once indifferent, now track inflation rates like weather reports, sensing the storm building. Some say the United States is different. They point to the world's biggest economy, advanced industries, and unmatched military power. They believe no collapse can touch a nation built this large. The argument feels convincing because the dollar anchors global trade. Every country needs it for oil, technology, and finance. But that dependence only lasts as long as everyone agrees to play by the same rules. History reminds us that empires fall when their confidence outgrows their caution. Rome, Britain, Spain, all once thought their currencies and influence would never fade. Every one of them learned how fragile permanence really is. The US debt to GDP ratio now mirrors late-stage empires. More money is owed than produced, and interest payments consume more resources each year. Numbers too large to imagine quietly shape the nation's future. The cost of borrowing now rivals the cost of defense. When a country pays more to sustain its debt than to protect itself, the balance begins to tilt toward decline. It's a warning history always repeats. Each year, the interest on national debt grows heavier. Paying it requires borrowing even more, trapping the nation in a loop that can't be escaped through normal growth or taxes. The system feeds itself while hollowing everything else. Confidence in leadership fades when promises sound repetitive. Citizens watch politicians argue about spending while prices rise quietly in the background. Inflation doesn't need permission, it creeps into every bill, paycheck, and grocery list. Across towns and cities, people begin feeling it in daily life. Rent increasing, groceries shrinking in size, and paychecks stretching thinner. No single event causes collapse, but millions of small cuts do. Middle-class families adjust their habits without realizing they are adapting to decline. They drive less, buy cheaper food, and save less each month. The slow loss of comfort replaces the panic of sudden crisis. Inflation becomes invisible theft. A worker can earn more money, but still feel poorer. The digits rise, yet their power falls. That quiet erosion is how trust in money disappears without riots or headlines. People respond by borrowing more, thinking credit will fill the gap. Loans, credit cards, and mortgages grow, creating a second illusion of wealth. Debt becomes a lifestyle, and that dependence deepens the country's exposure. The wealthy move into assets, land, stocks, metals, anything that holds value better than cash. The poor cling to wages that lose strength each month. This gap widens until resentment becomes its own currency. Discontent grows louder. Citizens argue not only about politics but about fairness. They sense that the system rewards those closest to the printing press, while the rest bear the cost in silence. Digital currencies, gold-backed tokens, and alternative systems begin attracting attention. People experiment with new forms of exchange, searching for something stable when their official money feels unreliable. The public starts asking questions once reserved for economists. Can the dollar fall, and what happens if it does? The fear isn't abstract anymore, it's personal, tied to rent, savings, and the future of every paycheck. A collapsing currency doesn't only break economies, it breaks societies. When money stops working, every deal, job, and plan becomes uncertain. Families argue over costs, businesses distrust clients, and unity fades under the pressure of survival. Crime increases because desperation removes boundaries. Theft rises, not from greed, but hunger. History shows that when value disappears from money, it also disappears from morality. During collapse, even honest work loses meaning. A paycheck no longer guarantees food or stability. People trade favors, services, and loyalty instead of bills that no longer represent anything real. Resentment replaces cooperation. Groups turn inward, protecting their own. The idea of a shared national identity weakens when everyone feels abandoned by the system that once promised security. Governments often respond with control, price freezes, rationing, or restrictions on savings. But control doesn't rebuild value. It only delays the inevitable collapse that began the moment printing replaced production. As history shows, once faith leaves money, chaos follows quickly. The collapse doesn't just empty wallets, it empties trust. It turns neighbors into competitors for the same shrinking resources. Faith in the future erodes faster than numbers on a chart. People lose motivation to save or plan, focusing only on today. That mindset turns recovery into a much steeper climb. Power shifts quietly toward those holding real assets, landowners, traders, and those with access to stable currencies. The structure of society rearranges itself around scarcity instead of abundance. Inflation becomes political. Debates over blame dominate public life. Some accuse the government, others blame corporations, but few understand that the real problem is the collective loss of belief in the system itself. When the currency dies, it rarely takes the empire alone. Empires fall because their economies lose cohesion, their people lose patience, and their leaders lose credibility all at once. The three stages are clear: printing for comfort, panic from distrust, and rejection of money itself. Each one feels manageable while it happens. Yet together they create a collapse no one can reverse. Every stage feels safe until it's not. The first brings relief, the second confusion, the third ruin. History doesn't repeat perfectly, but it rhymes loudly enough for anyone willing to listen. History isn't prophecy, it's a warning system. Nations that learned from it survived, and those that ignored it vanished. The question isn't whether collapse is certain, it's whether people will recognize it before it arrives. The signs are visible for anyone paying attention: rising debt, weak trust, and growing dependence on printed solutions. America still has time, but every cycle starts with the belief that this time is different. Money is only as strong as the faith behind it. Once that faith breaks, no government can print enough paper to restore it. Rebuilding trust takes generations, and by then the empire it served is already history.